Is he gonna bite me?
No.
Are you promising me?
I promise you, he won't bite. I might bite you. He won't bite you.
You sure?
I probably
Okay, I'll
will
do
not
it.
bite. Okay.
Wait, can he sense my fear?
Oh, you've been watching too many movies.
Because I'm all hot right
You know?
now. You might think I'm like
where's
a
that coming
warm-blooded animal or something. Yes, I am going to have this nice man put this beautiful, holy shit, I can't do it. I can't do it. Okay.
Hello, I'm Faye Bellamy, and I want to welcome you to Blackside Storybook. Our guest and our guest storyteller this evening here at Blackside Storybook is Donald Stone. And I met Donald Stone in 1966 in Atlanta when he came to join the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and got involved with nonviolent struggle for justice for black people in this country, and eventually got involved in the anti-draft movement during the Secret War, which was known as the Vietnam conflict. So when we come back after our little break, we're going to get off into some storytelling, and we want him to tell us something about what it was like in his life when he was a little boy and what kind of things were going on. And also to tell us what made him, or what influenced him and motivated him to get involved with other people and be concerned about other human beings in the world other than just himself, all right? Because he's a very good person and he's had a long history of involvement. So we'll be back in a very few minutes with that.
Elijah, look at the man.
Okay.
And action.
Happy birthday, Martin Luther King. You are watching
American Pictures. Tomorrow. Tomorrow's
pictures.com.tv.
Thank you.
Just relax. Relax. Here at Blackside Storybook this evening, we're going to have Donald Stone give us some background on his childhood and his growing up effort. But I want to tell everybody who's with us tonight. Some of you have been here before and have shared this stage with us before. And Ayana Orr is our new member, and so is Mikey Stone. And our graduates, we should say, are Daphne Johnson, Shanita Hall, Melody Wright, and Angela Stevens. Donald, I'm going to welcome you to our program, and I'm going to ask you to just feel very comfortable and just tell us some stories about you and your little boyhood.
Yeah, well, you put me in a comfortable place.
All right.
What ages are most of you? Melody? 11. Angela? 10. The reason I was asking you, because I was trying to put, the age you are in a framework in terms of where I was when I was, say, 10 and 11 years old. And I think when I was about that age, I was living in Mobile, Alabama. And it was, I would say, around 1945. In 1945, that was just at the close of World War II. And out of that war, a lot of blacks had gone to struggle to be a part of the military, and there was wholesale discrimination in the military. And at the end of that, end of that period, blacks began to come back, and there were no jobs for them. So this was a very critical, a very crucial period in the lives of black people. Now, there were a lot of things that the society in general we were going through. If you were living during that particular period of time, you had to have, in order to get certain kinds of foods like sugar, you had to have stamps. In order to get gasoline, you had the stamps, because these things were rationed because of the war. Also, things were, if you talked about the society that black people had to live in, it was pretty well locked up tight. And what I mean by locked up tight, I mean that you didn't have the opportunity to go to places like everybody else, that everything was segregated, the buses were segregated, the theaters were segregated, everything like that, you know. So this is a period in 1945. The other thing that I remember about that time was that I used to go visit my grandparents who lived in Snow Hill, Alabama, which is a very little city in Wilcox County. There was this school there called Snow Hill Institute that had been founded by my grandfather, whose name was William James Edwards. And he had finished Tuskegee Institute and had gone back to Snow Hill to try to start a school because there were no schools for black people at all, you know. So this was where I used to go to visit my grandparents during the summer. And that was the most wonderful period of my life that I can remember because this was a town where there were no white people. You didn't have to worry about being discriminated against because all you ever ran into were black people. The only white person that you ever saw was the postman, and you saw him once a day when he came to deliver the mail. Now, this was a very important school, Snow Hill Institute, because it was started at a period where there were no schools at all for blacks. You know, talk about the right to a public education. Well, for black youth and black children, there were no schools at all. So this was the kind of situation that I used to go every summer to visit my grandparents. You know, and as soon as we'd get there, we'd take off our shoes like you have now, and that was the most magical part, being able, you know, being from the city and having to wear shoes all the time. Once you got to the country, you could take your shoes off. But the main thing that this had an influence on me because my grandfather had gone back to this city and started a school where no school existed. And that had a tremendous impact on me because he was doing something for his people, for black people, but they didn't have any schools, and he had managed to acquire an education from Tuskegee Institute, so he went back and started a school for blacks. And that had an impact upon me because he used to say, those of us who are better educated have a responsibility to those of us who are less educated, who didn't go to school, you know. And you should always remember that once you get an education, you should always remember that there are people who are less fortunate than you, and you have a responsibility on the basis of the education and the training that you have developed to begin to help your fellow man. So as things developed, you know, later on, and this was much later during the period of my youth, you know, I began to travel, you know, between those two cities, and you couldn't sit anywhere. We couldn't sit anywhere on this. This was a train. We used to travel by train, which was at that time a very popular form, you know, way to travel. You know, you travel by bus now, but very few people travel by trains. So the blacks always had to sit in the cars, segregated away from everybody else, and it was always towards the end. And all of these were trains, not diesels. These were old coal engine trains, and the cinders would fly out, you know, and there wasn't air conditioning, and you would open the window, and all the soot from this coal would come in, you know, the cars where we were. So, and later on when we traveled by bus, you know, you had to always go to the back of the bus. Now, I used to have a lot of interesting experiences because I used to travel by myself. And it would always enter my mind to challenge these laws. What would happen if I sat somewhere that I wasn't supposed to sit, or the laws, the Jim Crow law says that I couldn't sit, you know? So every time that I would travel, you know, I'd always end up sitting, maybe not in the front, but towards the front of the bus, you know. And the whole rule was that when whites got on, they were supposed to start sitting at the front, you know, and fill up from the front. And the blacks would get on, and you were supposed to go all the way to the back and start filling up the bus from the back. So my idea was to say, get on this bus, you know, and to not sit all the way in the back, you know, but sit just a little bit beyond the halfway point. And every time the bus would start filling up, you know, white people would get on, you know, and some of the kinds of experiences I would have would be like this, you know. A white person would look at me very strangely, you know, and sometimes some of them wouldn't say anything and they'd sit behind me. But then you'd get a very racist person, you know, who would get on the bus and he would say, "Boy, what are you doing sitting there? Get up and let me have that seat," you know. And I would always, you know, I mean, wouldn't be budged by the first instance, you know. I'd always resist, you know. I say, "I'm not moving." I say, "I'm perfectly within my rights by sitting here," you know. And then the person who was the passenger, what he would do would go appeal to the bus driver. And the bus driver was just like, you know, he was just like the law. It was his bus, he was the law, and you had to sit where he said to sit, you know. And if the bus driver didn't feel like being hassled, he would just tell the white person, say, "I'll just go on and sit behind him," you know. But if the bus driver himself was a very racist person, you know, he'd come back and make a big show, and I would have to get up and move, you know. And then if I would resist the bus driver, say, tell the bus driver I wasn't going to move, you know, then he would stop at the next town, and then he would call the police, the sheriff, you know. Then all of these guys would come get on the bus, and the first question they would always ask me is say, "Boy, where are you from?" As if somebody in the South didn't have enough, you know, gumption
Yeah.
to sit like that, you know. And I would tell them I was born here in Alabama, I was reared here in Alabama, and they would find that very strange that someone who was from Alabama would challenge these segregationist laws. They would always think, well, you must be from up north or somewhere, Chicago or Philadelphia, and down here, you know, making trouble. So that always would be a kind of situation that I would be confronted with, you know. And I know that, I don't know, you probably, your parents maybe have had similar kinds of experiences, but those were the kinds of experiences that everybody black was confronted with during that particular period. Later on, when as I began to grow older and came to Atlanta, Georgia, I came here in 1953, and it was the same situation, you know, that I left in Alabama. You know, there was segregation everywhere. If you got on the bus, you had to get on the back, or if you went to a theater that was, say, like the Fox, you'd have to go all the way up to the top.
Fire
you know.
escape.
Fire escape, you know. So those were some of the kinds of experiences that we had. So what happened that changed that? There were some things that began to happen to change that whole situation so that you know, our children, you know, are not confronted with that. And that was a movement began to develop, and it's had its beginnings basically in North Carolina, where some students from North Carolina A&T went to this Woolworth five and dime store and sat at the counter and said they wanted to be served.
Okay, we're going to come back to the rest of that story because that's where our jumping off point in just a minute, okay?
Yeah.
You can take off where you left off.
Hello, big man. Come on, let's go.